But what have you found are some really key attributes for people to consider when wanting to adjust their mindset and their attitude towards their own voice?
Sound check. Check 1, check 2.
I think learning to be self-aware in a non-judgmental space. So learning to observe rather than to critique. And singers often jump to self-editing, like vocal editing, I call it, when we're practicing something, they're listening for what they're doing, they're kind of really intent, and they're editing as they go. They're trying to figure out what they're doing wrong, how they can fix it. And that can be helpful, but only after we've made observation rather than judgment. So one of the things that I ask, and this is especially with original artists, because I work primarily with original artists, touring, that kind of thing, recording artists, it's asking yourself to be observational without being judgmental towards yourself. And then you can say, is this what I want to bring to the vocal table? And if not, what are the things I'm willing to do to change it technically? And if I can't change it technically, what am I willing to do with the overall artistry in order to still communicate what I want to communicate? I think artists tend to get extremely enmeshed with their own artistry, and that it can be really helpful to remember that your art is the thing that you create out of you, but it is not you. We don't have power over another person's perception of our art. We only have power over how we engage with our own art. So some of the attributes I find with the most successful artists are people who are willing to be serious about their art, but not take themselves so seriously. Be okay making mistakes, trying new things, risk-taking, trying new sounds, being silly, taking a song and singing it in a way that they would never in a million years singing it in front of a group of people, but just being playful. Another attitude that I see in really successful people is the ability to get input and change their art based on collaboration. So the artists who double and triple down on what they feel is the right thing, this has to be like this, melody line has to be like this, and and they get really passionate about it being just so, are the people who fall into perfectionism traps and the people who fall into, like you were saying earlier, fixed mindset, where we can't change something. And it also makes it really hard to collaborate with you, which then kind of starts this ball rolling of it's like self-fulfilling prophecy. No one wants to work with me, but it has to be just the way that I want it, which makes no one want to work with you. Right? So those are some attributes that I see in really successful artists: the ability to observe without judgment, the ability to collaborate, the ability to take risks, and to not take everything so personally, to not make failure personally.
Yeah. It's a challenge, isn't it? Because when we're working towards a growth mindset, having, been in a fixed mindset, one has to really shelve one's ego and be willing to make observably silly mistakes, because it's actually only through the making of those mistakes that the learning process can really take place. The difficulty is, I think, in our modern society is that when you're doing that, you're painfully aware that other people don't know that you're trying to work towards a growth mindset. And so you really have to work, you've really got to own that process, haven't you, for yourself, and be very content within. That can be quite difficult for some people to be strong enough within themselves. And that's not a judgment. That's just a recognition that this is not easy. It's one thing for us to wax lyrical about this attitudinal shift, but it's actually I guess if it were easy, everyone would be doing it, right?
Yeah, and I think what's so interesting is that this really ultimately comes down to boundaries and our acceptance of what we can and cannot control. It is poor boundaries to try to make another person feel any sort of way about you. You can't do that. So if you're constantly working on your artistry with the lens of what is another person going to think about me or my art, then you're already 10 steps behind because you don't have any control over that anyway. And it's a low-key manipulation tactic to try to get people to feel a certain way about you. And I think the big attitude shift of like, I am in charge of me. I can only control myself and my reactions rather than how other people come at me or what they say about me or what the haters say and all of that. That is essential. And I do think that that's that deep inner fortitude. Ultimately, it is this idea of, are you in a place that thinks that nothing is going to change? Do you have what's called eternity bias, eternity thinking? I'm going to do this thing and it's going to be like this forever and ever, amen. Or are you in a place that you expect growth? You expect change. You understand you're not going to be the same singer tomorrow as you are today. You're not going to believe the same thing about your voice in 2 weeks that you believe today. And the music you create in a year is not going to be the same as the music you create in 5 minutes.
It's really leaning into that neural plasticity to acknowledge that I don't have to, this is not set in concrete, right? That my, to actually be healthy as a human being is to be growing, is to be changing, is to be developing.
Yeah. Like that's the definition of being a person.
Yeah. Being a healthy person.